And welcome back to the Golf Intervention Podcast. My name is Eric Layton. I'm here with my co-host Rob Fales, and we are fired up tonight. We've got an awesome guest. Mark Sweeney from AimPoint is here, and he is going to, I guarantee you tonight, Rob, that the listener is going to get better at golf just by listening to this tonight. I can almost guarantee that because this man has changed. I believe this, and I'm not overstating this. This man has changed golf right here.
Yes.
And it's exciting to have him on. I know, Robbie, you've had a relationship with him, so it's cool that you were able to get him on the show. And we're so thankful that you came on, Mark. We're so happy to have you. And I wanted to start off tonight by telling a little story because I don't know what year it was, but we were just chatting off air here, that the first time I was exposed to AimPoint, which I'm going to give it, Mark's going to describe it a little deeper here, but it's a green reading technique. That's what it is, green reading. It's deeper than that. But I've been teaching golf for 22 plus years, been playing golf a long time before that. And to be truthful, and I told this on the last episode, Robbie, it always felt a little bit like snake oil salesman when you're teaching people to read greens because truthfully, I had no idea how I did it, and I had no idea how to really teach people how to do it. And so then I go to the Teaching and Coaching Summit, which is this big every other year annual meeting of golf instructors. Mark, do you remember what year that was that you were there?
That was probably 11 or 12.
So 11 or 12, 2011, 2012, sitting there, and I'm listening to this man's presentation. He's talking about a graphic that he designed. It was really cool for the Golf Channel. I remember saying, I remember seeing that's so cool. I remember when it came out and thinking I remember sitting on the couch with my father, and we're talking about the cool graphic on the screen where it's showing the line of the putt and how much it's going to break. And I'm like, how do they do that? Like, how is that even done? That blew my mind, right? I heard it's 100,000 lines of code, so we'll get into that later.
Yeah, that's about right.
So then I go to the Teaching and Coaching Summit, and he says, I'm the guy that invented this, and now I've got a green reading technique. I'm like, okay, so he describes it. And then we do these breakout sessions. So we're on this green behind these bleachers, and I swear, I don't know how many people were on the green for the breakout session. It was a lot of people. And from my recollection, hundreds of people. And from my recollection of it, you basically had this chart in your hand, and you were randomly having people pick places to putt from, and you would walk up and go, that putt breaks 9 inches, or that putt breaks 13 inches, and then someone from the crowd that you pulled out would roll the putt, and dang if it didn't break 9 inches or 13 inches. And my mind was like, I literally was walking off the putting green. I had a friend of mine with me who called me tonight randomly anyway, and I'm like, this is voodoo. I've never seen anything like this. It was totally mind-boggling to me, and I thought, this guy has figured it out. And somehow, some way, this is going to change golf. Now, fast forward, here we are. So
12 years.
12 years later, and the technique being refined and done in a way I think that now is very accessible for all levels of player. And this is what I want to reiterate with the show tonight. We're doing this show because whoever you are listening to this podcast, we know who our listeners are, Rob. We're pretty in tune to this. We've got players of all levels and abilities that listen to this podcast, and a lot of beginner golfers that are just trying to get a little bit better. And AimPoint is right for all of you. Okay? I'm saying that. It's right for all of you. We're going to dispel some myths about it. We're going to talk about it with this guy right here tonight. So, Mark, if you wouldn't mind, could you kind of run us through generally what AimPoint is, how you kind of developed it? It doesn't have to, doesn't have to be a super long description, but we want the listener. Remember, we've got a lot. This is not all tour players tuning in. We have a lot of beginners, and then we want to just kind of give them an idea and encourage them on using AimPoint. So, could you describe it for us, for the listener?
Yeah, sure. The core of AimPoint, which a lot of younger people don't know because they were not born yet when it started, or they were too young at the time, was a piece of software that could predict any putt on any green, any hole position, any green speed, any wind, any grain situation. So it was used on TV. It's about 100,000 lines of code, and I had to be able to predict any putt on any course on tour within 3 seconds of the ball hitting the ground. And that's what it did. So it was very fast, very efficient, and had to be very accurate because it was always live on Golf Channel, and there was no editing afterwards. There was no, oops, that wasn't right, let's tweak it and do it again. It was, guy got up and hit the putt, and we put the line down before he putted, and it had to be right. So it forced us to get the math as really, really accurate. I had to do it in Maui with 30-mile-an-hour winds. I had to do it on different green types. And so we did that on Golf Channel for 6 years. Did thousands and thousands and thousands of live putts to refine the math to the point where it just worked. And then that evolved into a teaching method, which in the beginning was a little more complex, but now it's been refined down to the Express method, which was designed for 7-year-olds. And that is the one you see on TV now. It's the only one I teach because, frankly, it's hands down the best one out there, the easiest one out there. You can learn it in an hour and actually start using it immediately. So that's why I love it. It's super non-technical and super accurate at the same time.
And so the visual of this, I think anybody that watches golf on TV sees the folks, they're using their feet now to straddle the line and determine some percent slope value, correct? And then use their fingers to aim. So originally it was done by mapping greens. And this is kind of how I left the teaching and coaching summit. Like, well, I don't have maps of my greens, and I don't have, it was kind of a complex system at that time. And then it turned into a much simpler system. And the story of this I heard you tell on a different show I thought was amazing, was basically developed to teach kids, right? Like you just mentioned. And so give us like a quick snippet of that story, because I think it's just amazing how because I assumed it was because they were outlawing the green books, which if you don't know, it's like mapping the greens and finding all the slopes. And then the USGA in their wisdom outlaws that. Like they outlaw a lot of things. And then so I was thinking you had to refine, the method or whatever, but you really developed it for kids, right? It kind of on a whim, like out of nowhere. So how did that work?
Yeah, the Express method is actually, I think, the fourth version of AimPoint, and it's gone from kind of PhD level green reading down to grade school green reading without losing any accuracy. If anything, it's more accurate now because it's just an easier system. And so I'd say version 3 I was teaching, which relied on you understanding angles, like 30 degree, 60 degree, 90 degree. Yeah. And I was going to go teach a junior clinic with Rob Noel in Louisiana, and I was literally on the airplane texting with him, and he said, our first session is the 7 and 8-year-olds. They haven't had angles in school yet, so you need to think of something else. And I was like, oh man, I got these kids for 2 hours. I have no idea. What to do with them. And then and Rob was a bow hunter, and he had told me a way where you can use your thumb to gauge your distance to a target. And so I go, let's just put our thumb to the side of the hole to get our aim off the hole. So just get them feeling the high side, aiming on the high side, because kids just aim straight the hole and miss, and aim straight the hole and miss, and eventually it goes in. Yep. And so let's just get them on the high side of the hole somewhere. And so he called it the thumbs up read, for kids, where they would feel the high side, hold their thumb up, and hit it there. And it actually worked really, really well because your thumb is like 1.5, and most of your putts are 1s or 2s, right? So it got them really close, really fast, and they were having fun with it, and it was natural. And I came back and I told a bunch of AimPoint instructors about it, and they all thought I'd lost my mind. And then we went and showed it some mini tour players in Spain, and they all went, we like this better. We're going to use this. And I remember going, wait a second. This is like a little kiddie read. They're like, no, we like this better. And they were making all these great putts with it. And then a month later, Brian Gay used it at Kapalua and shot the course record at the plantation course. Not even knowing how to do it right, he shot the course record. And that's why I was like, all right, there's something here. We got to figure out what's going on here, because obviously something is working, even if I don't quite get it.
And then would you say, did it become more in demand after they changed the rules about the mappings of the greens?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. After that, when they went to change the rules, and I'd been anticipating this for a number of years. They changed it later than I expected. I had quite a few players and caddies, especially caddies, had loads of caddies come to me because they could no longer rely on maps. And when they get called in to read a putt, as one caddy told me, he said, I better get this right, because if I don't, he won't call me in for 3 more weeks.
Wow.
So, they need to be able to get putts accurately read when they're asked to, otherwise they don't get asked.
No doubt. So we on this show, we kind of try to figure out how we can teach different sort of levels of player to understand what is purposeful for them in their skill development, right, to develop to the next level. And so that beginner golfer, someone who's shooting, I'm just starting to keep score, to sort of bogey golfer, would you teach that person differently than, say, an intermediate golfer, than say a tour player, as far as like what is the important skills for them to learn an AimPoint? Is it all the same, or do you scale it depending on the level of player?
It's pretty similar. I definitely would scale it down for beginning golfers, just getting them remotely close. The beginner golfer, believe it or not, after 30 minutes or an hour, gets pretty much the same reads I do for a basic putt. So I would teach them that, and then very quickly go to speed control. So the big miss with a beginner golfer is not green reading at speed, but having a good read is going to certainly help their proximities a lot. And it's so easy to teach. You teach it to them and then say, okay, now we'll go spend 90% of our time on speed and a little bit of face work. As a player gets better and better, we can refine the read so that it's not handling 90% of cases, it's handling 100% of cases. So we're filling in the gaps of little awkward corner case situations, how to really kind of dial down the accuracy depending on exactly where you're standing and exactly what part of your fingers you're using. Not really important when somebody can't start their ball within 5-10 degrees of their intended line.
Yes.
But when you get to a tour player who needs to convert 30% or more of his mid-range putts, you better have a really tight read. So we get a little more refined with a competitive level golfer, but again, then you're going right back to speed control after that, because once their line is good, the majority of their misses tend to be speed misses. They're not face misses, they're not read misses. It's 80% speed misses.
It seems to me like in the beginner golfer, and I do this with my beginner ladies clinics, like we just try to figure out which way it's going to break. A lot like you were talking about with the kids that you were teaching. And Robbie has taught me this about the geometry of missing on the low side, or starting the ball on the low side of the break. How much further away from the hole the ball is going to end up.
Yeah, if you could share that math, that'd be awesome.
I will tell you, I visualized this, and we'll get you to do the math here. I know you're eating your pizza. Eat your pizza, so I'm going to tell the story. But I was out in the rain giving a putting lesson with, I would call him like a, probably bogey golfer, a little worse than bogey golfer the other day. And he struggles with his putting. And we were just trying to hit some, we weren't even talking about green reading, but he was just telling me, I'm going to aim this one about a foot left of the hole. Well, I knew it broke the other way from about 20, 25 feet. But about a foot. I mean, he was right. It was about a foot break, but he had it the opposite way. And when he putted it with really good speed, and it ended up about 5 feet from the hole. And I'm like, wow. Like, you would think in your mind it would end up 2 feet from the hole. But it ended up 5 feet from the hole in that instance. So tell me the math on that. Like, how does that work? And then if the beginner golfer can understand this, don't you think they'd 3-putt way less? Like, if they just got that right?
Yeah, definitely. I've explained this to tour golfers. I've explained this to top 10 in the world tour players, and they didn't understand the dynamic either, believe it or not. And the dynamic is, generally when you underread a putt, however much you underread it by, so let's say you underread it by a foot, your miss at the hole will be 3 times your error. So if you underread by a foot, you'll be generally about 3 feet to 4 feet, depending on onto the hole, depending on how fast screens are. So when your guy aimed a foot left instead of a foot right, that's a 2-foot miss, and he ended up 5+ feet away, which is about not quite triple, but uphills are a little a little less sensitive than side hills and downhills. But generally speaking, a small underread becomes a pretty big miss at the hole. It's the opposite for overread. So if you overread, the miss at the hole is half of your error. So if you overread by a foot, it'll finish 6 inches high on average. Sometimes still go in if you hit it soft. So the equivalent miss is way closer to the hole on the high side than it is on the low side. So that's also why sometimes low misses that aren't that bad look really bad by the time they get to the hole, because they ducked 3 or 4 feet under. You're like, whoa, I really missed that. Well, no, you missed it by a foot.
Yeah, and then what they'll do...
missed the hole by 3 feet.
Yeah, and then what they'll do is they'll actually blame the wrong thing. They'll say, I hit it too hard, when no, you didn't. You just started it too low, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've hit putts where I just barely pulled them, and they looked nasty at the hole. And I'm like, well, I had pulled a 30-footer, and it started a foot below where I wanted to, and now I've got a 3-footer up the hill. They look worse than they actually are in reality. That's the other thing that kind of helps calm some people down. Even though you missed the hole by 2 or 3 feet, didn't mean you misread it by 3 feet.
So I'm just curious, why is that? What is the math? Can you share the math of why it ends up 3 times further away? Or is it?
Well,
just curious.
The easy way to think about it is 2 dynamics are going on. If you're across the hill and you miss low, more of the putt is traveling side hill and downhill. If you miss it high, more of the putt is traveling uphill and then side hill and then downhill. So you've got a speed component, A. B, the minute you're below the hole, every revolution the ball takes, it's traveling further away from the hole. When you're above the hole, every revolution the ball takes, it's traveling closer to the hole.
Makes
so
sense.
One's traveling away from the hole, one's traveling towards the hole.
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. So that old time convention about the pros always miss on the high side is probably a pretty good. I mean, that's probably a pretty good thing. Back in the day when we had no idea about reading greens, the science of it. That was one of the things we were trying to always do, was miss it on the high side.
Well, you'll get a better proximity.
Yeah.
Especially on lag putts. If you're hitting a lag putt, overread them all. Go out of your way to overread them, and you'll end up with better proximities.
Yeah, and there's actually AimPoint processes in place to account for that. And that's been incredibly helpful.
Yeah, we build that into the system just to kind of force you to hit a better putt.
Yeah.
Nice. See, this is why it's helping. This is why it's helping you people. This is amazing.
No, like if I've got a level 1 golfer, I will hammer inside 6 feet. Disproportionately inside 6 feet, and then making sure that we're not underrating the long ones. And then, a little bit of mid-range, but it's not really that relevant for them anyway.
That is exactly the right process. Number 1 importance is 6 feet in, which is par saves and not 3 putting. Number 2 for mid to high handicaps is lag putting. Because as good as you get them reading the putts at 15 or 18 feet, they're just not going to make a whole lot more. A, because their face control isn't quite good enough and their speed's not quite good enough. So you try to reduce 3 putts and try to get more par saves in there. It has a huge effect on their score.
100%.
I'm asking this question out of ignorance. Is it part of AimPoint to actually pace the putts off to track? I know we do that for GameForge, but okay, so that is not part of the deal. But
no, one of the beauties, one of the best things about AimPoint, which very few people appreciate, is the fact that you really, you really don't need to know how long the putt is. Okay, so if you're going to calculate break accurately with a computer, which I've done, you have to know exactly how long the putt is. Well, that puts a lot of pressure on a golfer to stand up over a putt and say it's 16 feet, not 17 feet, not 15 feet. If you're using a system like that, you have to be super accurate with distance, and nobody is super accurate with distance. What AimPoint does is it takes that away from the equation. By holding the fingers up, which people don't get also, is you're creating a launch. I always say launch angle, and the TrackMan people always yell at me, it's launch direction. What angle are you hitting this ball off the hole? It's going to scale correctly with distance, so it doesn't really matter how long you are. Like, we need to know if it's 6 feet or less, but that's kind of it. It doesn't matter if I'm 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 feet. AimPoint's going to give you the right read without you knowing the exact distance. And that's a massive benefit.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about really what are some of the, before we get into a little bit more of the meat of it, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about AimPoint? What are some of the barriers that you feel like are not true about why someone might not want to do it or might have some resistance to it?
Sure, I'd say the 2 biggest ones now. In the old days, they would say, "Oh, it's just a placebo." People don't understand the math behind it is actually very, very accurate. The first one is people feel like they won't be good at feeling slope or that they can't feel slope. And in 15 or 17 years of teaching, some sort of slope feel, I've never in my life had a player who could not feel slope ever. And I've taught double amputees who feel the exact same number I do. So anybody who can walk around without falling down can feel slope. And usually within 20 minutes, they're picking up 0.5s, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. So feeling slope is not the hard part. When people make mistakes with AimPoint, it's typically not they get a bad slope. It's that their process was wrong. So they got a number in the wrong place. So they got the right number, but they got it in the wrong place. It's like, measuring your distance to the wrong flag. Well, the number was right, but it's the wrong flag. So that's you know what I mean? So people are much better at feeling slope than they think is the first thing. The one I heard today that I've had a number of people in the past complain about and actually refuse to learn AimPoint is because there's a misperception that we don't factor grain in, which I've never in my life said, and I can't figure out how it's out there, but I've had multiple people say, y'all don't factor grain in, so we're not going to use it. And I'm like, no, that's not true. We factor grain. It might not be the way you think we factor it in, but we absolutely factor grain in. If you're on Bermuda, you better understand grain or you're going to get some misreads and have no idea why. So that one drives me crazy because I can't figure out where that came from.
How about taking too long? It's too slow.
Well, so what I always tell people is, listen, we have all this golf on TV every week. Go time how long an AimPoint player takes and time how long a traditional reed player takes. And I've done this a number of times. Even though AimPoint looks different, and they're like, oh, well, you're walking your line. I watched Nelly read a 10-foot putt last week when she won. How many steps do you think she took to read a 10-foot putt? So with AimPoint, you'd walk 3 feet, 6 feet, and walk back to the hole, walk back to the ball, and hit your putt. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 or 9 steps, right? How many steps do you think Nelly took doing a traditional read to read a 10-footer?
Oh, God.
42.
37.
Whoa,
was
good
close.
guess.
That was actually real. Most people say like 15 or 20. It was 37 steps, and it looked totally normal.
Good Lord.
So they're going behind the ball,
Yeah.
walking past the hole to the other side of the hole. So now you've more than you've doubled length of the putt. Then you come back behind the ball again. Then some of them walk in the middle and step in the middle. Then you get back to your ball and hit your putt. It was 37 steps for a 10-footer. Now imagine how many steps you're taking for a 30-footer.
Oh, my.
You could be easily taking 75, 80 steps for a 30-foot putt. And people are like, oh, well, that's being diligent. Announcers, oh, they're so diligent on this read. They're looking from all angles. Yeah, they're taking 100 freaking steps to read the putt where you need to take
a lot of time. Yeah.
a third of that. So I don't buy it. Some people who are anti-AimPoint use that as their number one go-to complaint because we know the system works. We know the math is good. We know you get good reads from it. So the only thing kind of left to complain about is, oh well, you take long. Well, not if you do it right. If you do it right, you do not take long. You take 5 to 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, I don't know how much you like to talk about this or not, but there's a lot of the top players and/or their caddies using AimPoint, correct? I mean, like, I don't know if you can name names, but I mean, there's a. So, is Cam Smith an AimPoint guy?
Yes. Yep.
I mean, he's the best putter I've ever seen.
He's an amazing putter. I taught him AimPoint when he was 13 years old in Australia. When he was the number one junior, he's the number one amateur in Australia, like 13 or 14 years old, which is a great story, but I can't really tell it on air.
Understood.
A hysterical story, which I'll tell you later. But he got introduced to it by his coach, who's an AimPoint guy, very, very young. The top 5 of the top 7 finishers at the Masters use AimPoint, or their caddies use AimPoint. Ludwig Oberg uses AimPoint. First show at the Masters, finishes second, has no problem reading the greens, and he's doing stock standard AimPoint. And people are like, oh, AimPoint doesn't work at Augusta because of Rays Creek. It's all nonsense. It works better there than anywhere I've ever used it in my life because the greens are so pure.
Yeah.
Like it breaks exactly like the number you feel at Augusta. It's so pure. Half the top 20 in the world, both men and women, half of all wins on tour for the last 2 years are AimPoint players. This weekend, number 1 and number 2 finishers are AimPoint. It's almost surprising when the winner is not using AimPoint, honestly.
And are we starting to see, because I know you're so tied into the data now too, are we starting to see some changes on the make percentages from different distances? I mean, I kind of felt like there was one Robbie and I were talking about the other day, and I thought the number had maybe changed a little bit.
Well, there's a great view out there that came out not too long ago that I pick on all the time, where they say putting has gotten worse since 2002. Right? You all heard this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's out there, and I dug into it, and I actually did a video on it because it bothers me.
It was a good video.
So if you take the putting make percentage, let's say inside 10 feet, inside 20 feet, from 2002 to 2023, it's actually a downward sloping line. For some reason, 2002 had a shockingly high make percentage. It also happened to be the first year that shot length was used. And there's also, they only did like a third of the events. So there's a smaller data set. For some reason it's high, and then it drops. But if you look at the putting make percentages starting in 2014, which is when Express hit the market, it's up. Mm-hmm. All ranges, inside 10 feet, 10 to 20 feet. Every range has got an upward sloping line for make percentages. So since 14 till today, it's a steadily increasing line.
Yep.
So putting hasn't got better is a really screwy kind of way to manipulate the data, but it's been getting better for at least 10 years.
Yeah. It's awesome. So a couple of the sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I said now how much AimPoint has to do with it, I don't know, but it has gotten better for the last 10 years.
No,
I mean, I'm sure it factors in to some degree.
Without doubt. No,
Yeah, I would say.
You're being humble. So next question, as we get a little bit more into the meat and potatoes of the putting stuff, just for the listener who thinks that, okay, I can just see the number, right? If I see a 1, I'm just going to hold up a see a 2, see a 3. Can you explain what the inherent advantage is by using our feet as opposed to our eyes when we're predicting break?
Yeah. I've had a few tour players who said they wanted to just look at the number, and within 30 days they all quit AimPoint because you can't see the number.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of times you can see it's flatter, you can see it steeper, but I've been doing it for 15 years, and I can't see the number. You know, sometimes I'm pretty close, sometimes I'm like, whoa, that is totally different than it looks like. So there's too many optical illusions. So that's the big thing. It's not reliable enough. The second thing is the advantage of feeling the number rather than looking at it is you get these situations where, let's say it looks fairly flat, and then you walk and you're like, oh, that's a lot more slope than I thought. Well, now you've got sensory input from your body that's telling you this putt will break a lot. I feel it breaking a lot, and it's a lot easier to hit a confident line playing a lot of break versus if you look at it and go, well, it looks kind of flat. You want me to play 18 inches of break on this? There's no way. Now you're going to hit a crappy putt, basically. Mm-hmm. So getting that sense in your body really helps you hit a better putt with better speed.
No doubt. And I still can't believe how it's 2024 and commentators on the Masters are still talking about this magical pull of Race Creek. It's I don't know if you heard that, Mark, this year, but it was just infuriating when I heard it.
I do my best not to listen because it's, you can basically, so here's what I did once. I took all 18 holes at Augusta and mapped the compass direction towards Race Creek from each hole. So number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever. On the front 9, how many holes do you think point directly at Race Creek?
Oh, gosh.
1 doesn't, 2 doesn't, 3 doesn't. 4 actually happens to point directly towards Race Creek and is the single farthest green from Race Creek. It's just random coincidence, right? 5 slopes the opposite way. 6 doesn't, 7 doesn't, 8 doesn't, 9 doesn't, 10 doesn't, 11 doesn't. Get to 12, right on top of Race Creek. Now we're on Race Creek again. 13 doesn't, 14 doesn't, 15 a little bit, but not really. 16 doesn't, 17 doesn't, believe it or not, 18 maybe a little bit. So you got maybe 3 greens on the entire golf course that actually slope to Race Creek.
That's incredible.
So it's like, like you talk about Jack's putt on 17. He's like, Race Creek held the putt up. That green slopes directly towards 17 fairway. And if you watch the video, it breaks left to right away from Race Creek. So I can't ever quite figure out what they're talking about on that one.
That's awesome.
We have that at the country club. The river pulls the ball.
Yeah,
sure.
The members talk about that, and actually, Jay Haas talked about it on the because we host a Champions Tour playoff event, and Jay Haas was a round 1 leader one time, and he was on with Lanny. He goes, "Yeah, one of the members told me about how everything breaks to the river, and then I just putted really great after that." So, there you go.
Yeah, John Cook said that once about Pebble Beach. He said, "I don't care what AimPoint says. If you don't know where the ocean is, you got no chance." And I was like, believe it or not, the physics of it, the oceans have less gravity than mountains. So believe it or not, if anything was going to pull a ball, it would be a mountain, not an ocean. Oceans have the lowest gravity on the earth.
Oh, my gosh.
So this is what you battle. You battle convention. And actually, Robbie and I were going to do a whole putting show on just like crazy notions about putting. And I think that what we're learning now, and we're just like in the dawn of data and technology. You know, I've taught from the time when we never filmed anybody, you know, all the way till now where we've got 3D analysis and, you know, TrackMan and all the great stuff that we use, and things like GameForge that kind of give us data points on what we need to work on, and like all that stuff has really, really been helpful. And now we sort of, for whatever reason, are battling the old conventions. So like it's such a slow moving ship. You know, Sasha McKenzie could do a study on you know, face on putting and come up with the fact that you're going to putt 10 times better if you make 20% more putt, and people wouldn't do it because it's just a convention that's so long held. And I think that's kind of what putting has the most of those, I think, of any part of the game of golf. And I think it's just because, going back to what we were talking about before, when I saw AimPoint and there was an answer, and everything before that was a guess, and you had no ability to figure it out. And along comes this guy and says, "No, I got a computer program. I got some algorithm I developed that predicts using physics, you know, friction, velocity, slope, you know, all these things, and I can predict how the ball goes." And I saw it with my eyes. To me, you know, Robbie and I are very curious people. We teach, but we're also curious. We have no conventions. If we notice something, we're like, "Let me learn about that thing."
Yeah.
And so I think that your AimPoint Express is going to be the thing that really turns the ship in putting. I really believe that. I think everyone that's listening to this, including myself, should be delving more into it. You should be learning more about it. Get a lesson from an AimPoint certified instructor. In fact, you can find, are they listed on your website, the certified?
Yeah.
So these are the people that you certify personally and trust, and Robbie's one of them, by the way. So
yeah.
I send people to Robbie all the time. I mean, and he's going to be, you know, he and I are picking dates to be at CCV to do it, hopefully soon.
Nice.
But to me, it's the thing. It's not guessing anymore. And I don't know, I just can't in my mind figure out how you get pushback against that. That's the thing I'm trying to say. Like, I just don't understand.
Yeah, I've been fighting it.
Haven't we learned?
I mean, I've been fighting it since 2003, believe it or not. I patented this in 2003 and had massive, massive pushback for 5 years. It took 5 years to get on TV, you know. But the thing about AimPoint, if I can get somebody on a golf green for 10 minutes, I can sell them every time because it's so predictable. The ball does what it has to do, whether you like it or not. If you say the ball has to do this and it does it, eventually somebody goes, "Oh, okay." Like your experience at the summit, it's like, okay, I'm telling you this ball has to break 2.5 feet. Doesn't look like it. Doesn't matter what it looks like. It has to break 2.5 feet based on the amount of slope. And once you see that, you're like, well, you can't push back anymore. You might say it's not for me, and I'd rather just look at it. That's fine, but you can't say it doesn't work.
Yeah,
you just can't, and you don't hear anybody saying it doesn't work anymore because it clearly does work. It's just, is it something you want to use in your toolbox or not?
Right.
It absolutely works, people.
Yeah.
And the point that Robbie and I have been making on the podcast on our series on putting here is that your putting practice and development, and maybe we're going to get to this in a second, Rob, so I don't want to jump the gun, but it really should start with green reading. It should start with, you know, you got to read the greens, you got to control the speed, and you got to hit your start lines. But frankly, if you're out there practicing and not reading the greens as part of that, you're going to have a very hard time determining what part of your skill set needs the most work, right? Like you've got to start out with that. Otherwise, you know, you're never going to learn. You're never going to learn and progress, at least not at the rate that you should be progressing at. And I think that's the part that, and the reason why we've hammered that is I think that, and tour players are going to be different than this, but the traditional amateur golfer doesn't put enough weight into that, in my opinion, in golf in their scoring. They don't put enough weight into putting just in general on average.
Correct. And like as we talk about conventions, they think, and Mark, maybe you can shed some light on this, because they might put a gate drill out and they're hitting the right gate or they're hitting the left gate, or maybe they get on SAM with their pro and they say, "Oh, my face variability is too high." They think, "Oh, well, why would I need to learn to read greens if I can't start the ball in line?" But as we know, it doesn't quite work like that. So, Mark, can you kind of dispel that convention for us and understand why that might not be the case?
Sure. A lot of people misunderstand this, and I actually had a tour player one year in January say, "I'd like to learn AimPoint, but I'm not going to do it until my stroke is better." And he never came back. So I ran a simulation, computer simulation, that basically said, you have an error on your start line of 1 to 3 degrees, 0 to 3 degrees. You have an error on your read of 0 to 3 degrees. What happens if your read stays bad and your start line gets better and better and better? You know what happens? You miss more putts. You do a better and better job at starting the ball in the wrong place, which means your make percentage actually goes down. Now, if you increase your start line and your green reading simultaneously, you get huge gains. If you get them down both to 2%, both down to 1%, which is about a tour level, you make massive gains. But if you only do one, if you only do start line and don't touch a green reading, you're screwed. You literally will go, I have a great stroke, my sand putt labs are beautiful, I make nothing. Okay, well, that's because you're doing a better and better job at hitting the wrong line. Congratulations. It's like taking a roller out and rolling at the wrong spot all day. Nothing will go in the hole, right? So you've got to do both. High-level golfers tend to have pretty good start lines. Amateurs obviously need to do both. Green reading is by far the easier of the two to get good at. Green reading is not difficult. Getting a good target is not difficult. Start line's harder. Speed is the holy grail, right? You get a good speed player, it's game over at that point. So yes, I don't buy that. I'm just going to groove my stroke all day long. You're not going to make any gains.
And then with that,
you're just not, unless your reads are perfect already.
Right. Yeah. And then with that simulation, when you kept the start line variance the same, but improved the green reading.
Any improvement in green reading results in an improvement in make percentage. However, if you only improve your start line and not your green reading, you can actually get worse.
That's so interesting.
So you have to improve your green reading to get better at make percentage. You have to. There's no option. You have to get better at it. And then if you simultaneously get your start line down to 1 degree or less, now you're making a lot of putts.
Awesome.
And I also feel like it's really hard to improve your speed control if you really have no idea what the slope is. Like if you can't really judge the slope or learn to read the slope, it's hard to improve the speed control, which we know is ultimately hugely important too, right?
Well, we do see, and Rob, you can weigh in on this, but one of the side effects of getting a better read is people's speed immediately gets better because now they're playing an appropriate amount of break, and they don't have to use speed to take break out to try to force a ball on a line that's an inappropriate line.
Yeah. Oftentimes what happens is you have to re-educate their perception of how a ball interacts with slope when you do that because you're giving them a much better target for where the start line should be. And the problem is that a lot of these golfers, they don't perceive where the start line should be relative to where the ball is going to eventually be. So that's where, again, thanks to the AimPoint and the math that you've shared with us, is that we can actually show a golfer that the way that they think a ball interacts with slope. I mean, I do this all the time. I'll have them lay coins out, or I'll have them lay balls out, or I'll have them take a rope and draw it with a rope. Their perception of how the ball interacts with slope is wildly inaccurate relative to how it actually interacts with slope because they've built in all these biases because they're not reading the green properly, they've built in all these biases around, well, how do I get the ball in the hole? Well, obviously, then your perception of everything else is going to have to change as a result of that. So I think for in many cases, when you improve the perception of how the ball interacts with slope, you really start to improve your speed control because, and I'll just give you an example. Like I've actually golfed for last week. I gave them that same test of, all right, show me where you'd like to start the ball, and then could you please place golf balls along the path of the putt between your ball and the hole? And if you can divide the putt up into thirds, if you can mentally think about kind of the first third, the middle third, and then the last third of the putt, he basically had the golf balls in a straight line all the way to the end of the middle third of the putt, and then this huge J-turn at the end. And so you can imagine what he probably was doing to compensate for that. One of two things. Number one, he would learn to basically pull his left to righters as a right-handed golfer and push his right to lefters, and or hit it with capture speed that'd be way, way too fast to try to get the ball there. And it probably wouldn't even get there if he did. And so he had all this, conflict with his stroke and his speeds, but it was really because, A, he had a bad target, and then B, he developed a bad perception relative to that bad target. So it's a nasty cycle of poor target, poor perception, and then now you're having to make, I don't like the word compensations, but we'll say compensations to stroke.
Poor stroke.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you have a bad target, you must have a bad stroke in order to make the putt. Must.
Yeah.
So imagine you're aiming at the wrong flag from the fairway. Well, how are you going to hit the right flag? You got to hit some wicked, nasty hook or slice or something, right? So if you pick the wrong target putting, you must have a bad stroke. So it'll actually degrade your stroke if you have a bad target.
Yeah. Without
Yeah,
doubt.
and I think that's where a lot of the crazy putting issues come from, right? Because they don't really realize any of that, right? So then I'm just, how do I develop any faith and trust in what I'm doing? I don't. So therefore, I lack confidence all the time, and it's usually blaming something other than green reading. Right? When was the last time you were like, you had somebody in a lesson, Robbie, and they're like, yeah, I'm not making any putts, and their first thing they tell you is, I just don't read the greens well. Well, I don't think it's
Never.
that at all.
Yeah, no, it's not usually.
Because they assume it's something else. Mm-hmm. And it may be something else manifested because they can't read the greens well. But that goes back to the point that I was saying before, is you only have three main skills, right? So when I miss a putt, I got to have some feedback. Did I misread it? Did I misjudge it? Or did I mishit it? There's one of those three things, and if I don't really have a consistent way of reading and predicting the break of the putt and the speed, I'm never going to really get good feedback from that, and that's where that cycle just builds and builds and it manifests. And so then I think amateur golfers, kind of going into the sort of the crux of the people that I teach all day, is that they get out there and they have no confidence because they don't really know. So what do? They just don't even. I don't want to say they don't try, but they kind of don't try. I'm just being honest.
They kind of don't.
They're not out there.
You know why? Because they don't get improvement. Whatever they think they're doing is not. That doesn't have an effect. They're not getting better from it.
That's why we had you on, and that's why I told you when we start off air. I said, listen, you're going to change this. You're going to change golf. You are changing golf. You have changed golf, but I think you're seeing it manifested in all the millions of dollars that are being made on the tour, and people realize that. But what I want to do is tell the other people, you can play better golf and score better.
Yeah,
you can use the same technique. And what he's telling you is it'll take about 15 minutes to get the basics of it. And so someone told me the other day, I don't know. I don't know if I have the time to really read it, to learn it and then practice it. And I said, I don't know, man. I think it's better than guessing all the time. Right?
It doesn't take much practice, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I think it's not that difficult.
Awesome. So let's talk speed. Let's talk speed. So first things first, we got to know what our intention is. And I'm really big on having a clear and productive intention for speed. So obviously we can picture how if you had a level 1 golfer, which we're saying is shooting 88 and above, versus level 2, which is 88 to 76, versus level 3 inside 76, this dispersion of their speeds from putt to putt are going to be shrinking as they get from a lower skill level to a much higher skill level. So how does that play into, and how does that factor into what the golfer is trying to do when it comes to their speed control? How do we give them a mathematically correct speed target relative to their skill level and their ability to stop the ball the distance they want?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at a high level, at a high handicap level of golf, it's just about pure proximity. Right, so you're trying to be really good inside 6 feet, and anything other than that, you're just trying to get as close as you can to putt and get out of there. So you're not saying everything's got to be past the hole. You're just trying to get everything outside 7 to 10 feet as close as possible. Short, long, left, right. I don't care. Just close. Yep. Now, as a player gets better and better, you need to start raising your make percentages significantly in your inside 10 feet, inside 20 feet range, and significantly lowering your 3 putts. So people don't have any concept of how well tour players putt relative to everybody else. So, for example, a D1 college golfer makes less than 20% of all their mid-range putts. We'll say 10 to 20 feet. So kind of your birdie putt, but not an easy birdie putt. Great college golfers make about 20% of that. PGA Tour average is 30%, which is 50% higher than D1 college. They're making 50% more mid-range putts. That's the average. Now you go to winners. Winners can make up to 75% of their mid-range putts over 4 days. They literally are making 3 out of 4 putts between 10 and 20 feet. Now, you cannot do that with bad read, bad line, or bad speed. And it is... They are so much better putters than people realize. Now, what do they do really well? Their start lines are good. Their speed is much, much better much better than college or amateur golfers. But they also work on speed. When's the last time you saw an amateur golfer working on speed control? Not very often. It's pretty rare.
Yeah.
They're more likely to be hitting short putts. I'd almost say go out and hit 30-footers all day to the pin. Try to hit as close as possible.
Yeah, no doubt. So we'd say for our beginner golfers into kind of the intermediate level, we'd say outside of 7 to 10 feet, they should be trying to stop the ball basically on the hole for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once we get up to tour, right, so at what point, at what distance would you not want to see hardly any putts come up short?
Well, the general rule for a high-level competitive golfer is 1% from 10 feet and in, so basically none 10 feet in, 10% from 20 feet. So only 1 out of 10 from 20 feet is short for, let's say, a tour player, but they're also not smashing them 4, 5, 6 feet past the hole. So they have a much smaller dispersion with only 10% short. Now, at amateur golf, that's going to be more like 30 to 40% short for, let's say, somebody shooting mid-80s, right? But again, short's okay if you're shooting mid-80s, but you can't be 4 to 5 to 6 feet from the hole from 20 feet. You've got to be inside 3 feet. So the better the player gets, the more their dispersion has to get smaller. So all of golf is about narrowing dispersions, whether it's tee shots, approach shots, or putting. It's all about getting smaller dispersions, right? But what a high-level golfer does who has to make 24 birdies in a week, they are taking that dispersion and 20 feet in are moving it behind the hole. Yeah. So they have a 2-foot radius, a 2-foot diameter circle behind the hole, not just all around the hole.
How far past would you want them to train to be too far past, and how close to the hole would be too close to the hole in terms of, like, let's say they're going to do conversion putts from inside 20 feet. Like, is there a window that you'd like them to stop the ball beyond the hole, generally speaking, and how big is that window? And then, like, where would the center of that window be for?
Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, you never want to introduce a 3-putt.
Yep.
Okay, 3 putts are going to start about 3 feet, so you never want to be 3 feet past the hole. So that's one consideration. Another consideration is if the ball gets to the hole too fast and it's off center, it's going to lip out. So even at 2 feet past speed, you'll get a lot of lip outs from the high side and low side, right? So 2 feet to me is kind of maximum because you're either going to lip out or you're going to be 3 or 4 feet and you're introducing a 3-putt. The third factor is, well, how many do you want to leave short?
Right.
So if we're down to 10% short from 20 feet, my window that I like is 6 inches past to 2 feet past. So 6 inches to 24 inches past the hole. Anywhere in there is fine. There's not 17 inches is not a magic number. It's not a magic number. It's a range. I want to be past the hole a little bit on average so that they're not leaving too many short, but I never want to introduce a 3-putt either.
Yeah.
So when you hear juniors going, well, never up, never in, I'll just smash my 5-footer 5 feet past the hole. That makes no sense either, because congratulations. I had one junior say, well, our coach punishes us for being short, but not for being too long.
Yeah,
I said, well, you've done a really good job at that.
Yeah.
You've done exactly what he asked you.
So then for slower greens, they'd be probably closer to the 6-inch range, and then faster greens closer to the 2 feet, or are you taking that range itself and just moving it for slower and faster steps?
I don't really care, honestly. Usually downhills tend to be closer to the 2-foot range because the downhill putt 6 inches by, it is barely moving at the hole. Yeah. So the downhill fast ones tend to be a little bit farther past the hole. Believe it or not, the average distance past the hole on PGA Tour is 2 feet. So on average, they're 2 feet past the hole. It's not a foot, it's 2 feet. But they have faster greens than most of us play. So
that's cool.
And they're going to make 100% of those. So they're not lipping out, they're not leaving it short, and they're not 3-putting from there. So it's kind of the best of all scenarios.
Sounds mathematically correct to me.
Yeah, whether they do it, it's mathematically it's right. I'm sure they don't really think of it that way, but they have learned that to be out there, that's what you have to do.
No doubt.
That's what everybody else is doing.
And then, what do you see in terms of the way the best players in the world train their speed? Because I mean, there's so many different schools of thought out there. Always putt to holes, never putt to holes. Do more of like a blocked style versus random style versus, creating baselines for 10, 20, 30. Kind of where do you see like what the best players in the world are doing in terms of how they're training their speed? Or I guess do you have any preferences?
some of the better ones I've seen that you won't see from amateurs is even if they're at 3, 4, 5 feet, they're not training to ram those in. And you'll hear players say, "Oh, I'm just going to hit it firm and take the break out." Yeah, you don't really see a whole lot of that, honestly. Mm-hmm. They still try to hit pretty good speed. I see a lot of them doing a lot of lag putting, 30-footers. Just hitting a bunch of 30-footers. Just stop the ball where you want to stop it, and then once you get inside 10 feet, it's really kind of the same delivery speed. So the best practice I see inside 20 feet is just it's always the same speed. So if you train it, you'll see the ball, whether you're hitting a 5-foot, a 10-foot, or a 20-foot putt, the ball arrives at the hole at the same speed. Right? And that speed is usually moving, but not hitting the liner. If you're hitting the liner in the back of the cup, you've hit it too hard. So it's usually, for me, I always say the back bottom corner. So a ball that goes in, hits the back bottom corner without hitting the liner is kind of your ideal speed. If you're hitting the liner, it's too hard. If you're dripping over the front edge, it's too slow.
I like that. I'm going to steal that because I've been looking for a way to, because I've been using I use a lot of ghost holes. I try to get them to roll it over the hole and stop 6 inches to 2 feet past, and it works well. But it's like, from a feedback standpoint, when they're out on the golf course, obviously they don't have a ghost hole. So it's like if they make the putt, it's like how do they know if it was actually the speed they intended or not? So we're saying, like, as the listener, as you're visualizing this, right, you've got a hole, and then you'll usually have basically about an inch or so underneath the top of the hole to where it might be painted, it might not. And then you've got the actual cup itself. So you're saying you wanted to see it hitting the actual cup kind of towards the bottom of it.
Back bottom corner. So I have a friend of mine that calls it chocolate and vanilla. If you hit the top above the liner, it's dirt. It's chocolate. No, very, it's way too hard. If it hits the liner itself, it's hitting the white part of the liner. That's vanilla. Still too firm technically. Mm-hmm. But if you hit it exactly right, it goes back bottom corner, and a lot of times you'll see it pop up where the head of it comes up above the hole and then goes back down.
Cool.
Like, you don't see it a whole lot, but that's actually a really good speed.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Love that. Yeah. All right. So a couple more. Thanks for your time tonight, for sure. This is getting a little bit nerdier, but I think a good portion of our listeners will appreciate this. So the following are two of the biggest sort of aha moments I've had when I've learned more from you, and I'd be really curious to see if you could start to get them to understand, because I think these two things, I think if you don't understand them, they are potentially the cause of a lot of perception issues that we were talking about earlier in terms of how the ball is actually interacting with slope. So the idea of rate of break change as we move across different steps in different distances. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that, what that is, and then really how the slope value changes in terms of the effective slope value that the ball is interacting with and how that's changing as it's traveling toward the hole? I think those are two really, really important pieces. Again, a little heady, but I think if you do the work, if you try to really put your mind to it and understand these concepts, I think it can be extremely valuable.
Yeah, so what I tell people a lot of times, which kind of blows their mind, is the hardest part of AimPoint is actually 3 to 6 feet. And not because the process is hard, it's because the break is changing very, very quickly from 3 to 7 feet, let's say. So, for example, PGA Tour players miss 1 out of 100 from 3 feet. They miss 1 out of 5 from 5 feet. So you go 2 feet back, and they go from missing 1 out of 100 to 1 out of 5. Now, why is that? Well, typically by 5 feet, you're aiming outside the hole. But the rate of break, so we call that how many inches per foot the ball breaks, rapidly grows from 3 feet to 4 feet to 5 feet to 6 feet to 7 feet. So, for example, a 10-footer breaks more than double a 5-footer. A 20-footer breaks more than double a 10-footer. A 3-footer breaks more than double a 6-footer. And very, very few people understand this, that when you're in that difficult par save range or easy birdie range, if you use AimPoint, it'll give you the right read. If you're not using it and you don't understand that a 7-footer has significantly more break than a 6-footer, that you're going to miss. And not only going to miss, you might only miss by an inch, inch and a half. Well, guess what? That misses the cup because now you miss by 3 to 4 inches.
Yeah.
Because it's exaggerating your miss. So if you understand that, it's very easy to prove out. It's very easy to actually go hit putts and measure them. What I always tell people, if they're interested and want to nerd out on it, is if you look at a graph of the rate of acceleration, I think, for a free falling object, it looks almost exactly like the rate of break changing for a putt.
Oh, wow.
It's steep curve in the beginning, and then it flattens out. Starting about 10 or 15 feet, it flattens out. It gets very flat going out to 30. It still grows a little bit, but it looks almost exactly like a graph for a free-falling object. Well, why is that? Because they're both based on gravity. They're both functions of gravity, but the putt has more friction, and the putt, you're diluting the effect because it's on a tilt rather than free-falling. So anybody who simplifies it more than that is either oversimplifying it just to make it easy, but you're losing accuracy also. So the big question is, how technical do you want to get?
Yeah.
Right? At tour level, you're playing for a couple $1,000,000 a week. Yeah, you want to understand this pretty tight. If you're shooting 85, whatever. Not a big deal.
Yeah.
Not making tons of 7-footers at 85 anyway, right?
Yeah, and then
probably not. Yeah.
And then the other one is, again, like talk about how the actual slope value that the ball is interacting with is changing throughout the putt, because I think that's another really important one.
Yeah, so there's a great visual. So people always say, well, as the ball approaches the hole, it breaks more and more because it's going slower, which is kind of true. But we have to realize if you hit a putt and there's tilt, the putt will turn until either friction stops it or it's lined up straight down the fall line and then it's not turning anymore. Now, from your perspective, if you putt across a slope that's steep, you're going to hit the ball, you're going to watch it turn, and it's going to keep going right to left across your field of vision. It doesn't mean it's breaking. At some point, it'll actually be traveling straight down a zero slope, but from your perspective, it's going right to left.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, what is break? The break is the ball turning. Well, when it stops turning, it's done breaking. So the more it's turning, the more it's lining up with zero. So if it starts on a 3, it's eventually going to go to 2 to 1 to 0. So if you did this on glass, it's going to take that slope, whatever you start on, and it's going to turn until it diminishes it down to 0.
Yeah.
That's what the ball does. You put side tilt on it, and it turns until there's no more side tilt. The ball is looking for balance. It has to find balance, and it will continue to look for balance until friction stops it.
Yeah. And that is exactly why we do not take reads beyond the middle third of the putt, right there, because the putt's over.
the putt's over. A, there's not much putt left to it. B, how the putt arrives at the end is all set up in the middle section.
Yeah,
right. It's all determined. It's already determined at that point. The putt's over. The story's over at that point, pretty much. So if people are telling you look at the last 3 feet of a putt, good luck. Yeah. Good luck with that. It's not going to work very well.
Be good. Eric?
Yeah, that's mind blowing. I just think that there's going to be a lot of people that listen to that and go, "Wow." Either I don't believe what he just said, or everything I ever thought was wrong. I think that. I mean, I think
again,
that's
like
the crux of it.
that's why I think when what Mark just says, like when you look and you see from your field of vision that ball moving right to left, they're interpreting that as the ball breaking more at that section. And they see this ball going dead straight and then taking that huge J-turn in the end. And it's just, I can't tell you how many people that screws up. The more I'm teaching, like the curve is so much flatter. It's so much more gradual than you think. And I've even done a cool post. Actually, you can look at my Instagram a little bit before, but I took like a top view of the putt, what it actually looked like versus like from the ground level looking kind of along the putt from down below, and you can clearly see it. Like when you're on the ground looking at the ball rolling, like it looks like it's doing that. But then when you look from the top view, which is adding the time element to it, it's not. Like it's coming off that start lining way earlier than you think.
Way early. And I've seen a lot of golf industry magazines draw that J-turn where it shows it dead straight to the apex and then starting its break there. That is not what a ball does.
Yeah.
It's absolutely dead wrong. If you think that, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I think this science is going to change the putting stats. I mean, I think we're already seeing that.
Yeah.
I think we're already, but I think it could have equally influence on the beginner golfer and the intermediate golfer. because again, or maybe even bigger. I mean, in a way, not for millions of dollars, but an ability to actually putt better. Where I think a lot of amateur golfers just get stuck. They don't improve for the reasons that we discussed before. It's just too much of the same thing over and over again, and then they feel like, I don't even know how to get better, so I'm not going to do it. But if you can't read the green to start with, then you can't get the feedback. That's the point I think we've been trying to make.
Well, that's where I was. That's actually what got me into this, is I couldn't get better at putting. I made nothing outside 6 feet. Nothing. Zero. And nobody could really explain it to me. It just kind of pissed me off, frankly, and didn't really accept that as an answer. And so I started messing with it, and then it blew my mind how predictable it actually is. And the other thing that people don't realize, which Rob will tell you, is once you implicitly trust your read, the only thing you care about is just delivery speed. It takes all the gunk out of your brain, and you just relax, and all you're doing is rolling the ball. And that's one reason why your speed gets much better.
Yeah.
Do you recall how you read greens before AimPoint? Do you recall that, what your process was like?
It was standard. I just look from behind the ball. I would never waste my time going to the other side of the hole because I'm way too impatient for that. But I tell you what, there was a moment where it really hit me across the face. And I was playing with my buddies for skins, and we were at Champions Gate out here, and we were on the back nine, and there's all these skins on the line, and I hit an approach to about 5 feet, and I'm like, money, 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 let's go. I'm taking all you suckers' money. And I got up there, I looked at it, and I saw the line. I'm like, oh, man, I got this. I know exactly what this putt's going to do. I had never had more confidence in my life. I hit the ball, missed the hole by 6 inches. Low. And that's when this just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like I had that magical moment everybody talks about seeing the line, and the line appears on the grass, and you roll it, and like, and that actually happened to me, and it was wrong. I was like, this is bullshit. This just doesn't work. It's like everything I've been told is just wrong.
That's so great.
That literally was. And I lost all these skins, so it really pissed me off.
That's awesome.
Amazing. I did the same thing. I mean, but you just would guess. There was nothing. It was just looking, right? You were just trying to trust your instincts or trust your whatever subconscious brain. I think it was what I was told. Take the environment in, and
yeah.
I remember in college doing a lot of like repetitive practice to get where I could roll the ball down. Now again, as Robbie and I were talking about this, it was drills where I wasn't reading the putt. I was just putting over the same line over and over and over again, and I could putt the ball, like I could hit the ball really well. Speed was good. I stroked it well, but I never made putts, to your point, outside of a certain, every now and again you make one. And then I remember going to Eagle Point one time and playing. This was a long time ago, and I had a phenomenal caddy. And the caddy was phenomenal at reading greens, and I had 8 one-putts on the back nine. And some of them were long. We're talking 20, 30 footers on a very difficult golf course. Or this was in the pro. It was in an event there, pro member, pro member. And I was like, well, I did that because he was telling me where to putt it. Obviously, this caddy that caddies there every day knew, he was good at reading the greens because he watched the balls all day long for years. And it was just it was like, if I could just do that better. And then the question was like, how could I ever do that better? And then I saw your thing, and I'm like, now I could, there's a way. So I just feel like, again, it just kind of goes back to what y'all were saying. It's just about developing the feedback. And to your point, if you can boil it down to just speed control, I mean, that was the point you just made. We kind of glossed over that.
Such an important point.
Now I'm just worried about that. I'm not worried about everything else. I'm just worrying about speed control. That's an amazing thing.
Yes.
If we can boil it down to just one thing.
Because your attention is on what is actually relevant when you're actually focusing on it. I agree, Eric. I think it was like a quick statement of like, oh yeah, now you're just focused on speed. But I think that is so important. It's like if you can get your process to the point to where when you're actually swinging the putter, your intention is on speed, I think that is absolutely golden.
That should be all you're thinking about, and that puts you in a much more athletic state of mind versus somebody who's sitting there going, oh, I hope I don't push it, and I've got to make sure I do this on my mechanics. Like, good luck. Yeah. Like, you can't putt well like that. There's just no way.
Well, and there's so much doubt because you don't know if you've read the putt right or not. Like you can convince yourself you did, but you didn't because you don't have a real process. You don't have any type of process. So
awesome. I think that on the putting side of it, I think that's a great place to wrap. I do not want to go into the night without talking about Game Forge for just a little bit, if you're up for it, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, my pizza's finished now, but I'm still good. I'm fed and I'm happy.
There we go. So talk to us a little bit about what the motivation was behind starting GameForge. Why the stats you're going to give yourself as a player and or a coach are more meaningful than maybe something like strokes gained. And yeah, just anything else you'd want us to know about GameForge.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Bailey and I got into GameForge because as coaches, especially as a putting coach, I only teach putting, what I realized is if I don't know what the rest of the player's game looked like, it was hard to me to diagnose whether their putting was actually good or not good. So a player would come and say, well, my full swing coach says I need to make more putts. Yeah, well, maybe not. I don't know. How close are you hitting it? You know, it turned out this player's average proximity was 35 feet. Okay, guess what? You're not making a lot of putts at 35 feet. So go tell your full swing coach he needs to get you to hit it closer. So I couldn't get what I wanted out of it. And strokes gained on PGA Tour is amazing because you have every player of the field and you're comparing against that day, those pin positions, those weather conditions, and who's in the field. And that's the way true strokes gained works. Now, so here's a question I asked a couple weeks ago to somebody. Is it fair to compare somebody who shoots 100 against a tour player?
Nope.
How about somebody who shoots 90?
Nope.
How about somebody who shoots 80?
It's not fair
How
at
about
all.
somebody who shoots 75?
Nope, not even close.
Still not. I mean, I already told you, tour players make 50% more mid-range putts than a top D1 college player. So what is strokes gained? The predominantly strokes gained is comparing you against a tour player. Now, there's ways you can compare against a scratch golfer, but general strokes gained is if you miss a 10-footer, you get docked 0.4 shots. That is a tour player number. 0.4, they're supposed to make 40% of 10-footers. Nobody else in the world makes 40% of 10-footers. So you're benchmarking against the top 1% of the top 1% of the top 1% of people in the world. Not really fair for the other 99.99 people in the world. So it's frustrating because even at the college level, if you guys teach college players, their putting is always negative. Yes. Negative, because they're comparing against people who are dramatically better putters than them. Okay, so I have examples of a player who won the ACC championships one year, and she was negative total strokes gained, and she won the tournament. Technically, that's impossible. So I couldn't get what I wanted out of strokes gained for a junior college amateur level, even on tours where that were not PGA Tour. So GameForge is a much more intuitive way of saying more numbers, but how many greens did you hit? How many are inside 20 feet? What percentage of putts did you make? How many 3-putts did you have? You can wrap your head around those numbers. It's hard to wrap your head around. Well, I was minus 1.5 strokes gained putting. Okay, what does that mean?
Right.
Yeah.
You need to putt better. Well, you need to putt better if you want to play on tour.
Yeah.
What did everybody else in your field do?
Right.
Well, they were minus 2, but we don't know that. You might have been the best putter in the field, but you don't know it with strokes gained outside of PGA Tour. And now LPGA does a pretty good job with that, I think. So GameForge was a culmination of all that. As a coach, what information do I need? What information is easy to convey to the player where they can actually take action? Say, we did this with Sam Burns back the year he was like top 5 FedEx Cup, and he was hitting 5.5 approaches inside 20 feet. Okay, you cannot survive on PGA Tour with less than 6.5 inside 20 feet. And we said you need to find 2 more shots inside 20 feet. That's all. His putting was good. A lot of things were good. His greens were good, but he was hitting it too far from the pin. So I said, whatever it takes, you must be inside 20 feet at least 7 times around, which is kind of the PGA Tour standard. And he and his coach went and figured it out. They figured it out pretty quickly, and he was top 5 FedEx Cup, at least top 10. But it was something they were both completely unaware of.
Wow.
Well, I think that's what we use it for with our students. I mean, we look at, how many greens are you hitting? How many times are you, hitting for the level that you're on? And then you can communicate. See, I love it because I can communicate with my student better that way.
Like what's their next step?
Yeah.
Like where do you need to get to for the very next step in your progress? I think that's why it's so good. And
then I can communicate it by backing it into their dispersions that we're seeing on TrackMan, and then maybe a data point that's going to help them play better, to control that data point. And then it all makes sense to the player. So that now I'm able to communicate in a way because of GameForge, so thank you.
It's much more coherent.
And they don't even really have to track their stats that much. I mean, they can do some basic tracking. And all of a sudden, you're able to communicate to them what's their next step, what's the one next thing that they can do to make the biggest improvement. And that's all the amateur golfer is looking for. Because again, they don't have, a lot of them don't have, the people I teach don't have 4 days a week to hit balls, and they're not practicing a ton. They're just playing and then practice a little bit. And what can they do? What is their next one actionable step? And so if you can tie it to something you see on TrackMan and say this can affect this dispersion and get you another birdie putt per round or 2 more greens in regulation or less drives in the woods or out about. And I will tell you the best term is disruptor. Because when you describe a disruptor to somebody, they're like, "Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense! I do that all the time." Like people come up. We talk about disruptors on the podcast a lot, and people come up to me all the time. They're like, "Eric, so many disruptors." They just love the term, but it helps them conceptualize what it is they need to improve on to get better at golf, right? So all of a sudden, there's this blueprint that just sort of takes you along the path. So. We've said it before and we'll say it again. It is like GameForge is the thing. It takes a little work on your end to put the data in. It does, and there's some different ways you can do it. But after you use it for a little while, it's not so bad. You know, it's you get it in there, and all of a sudden you can communicate with your coach like you were describing. You can see it for yourself, and then all of a sudden, man, you can be efficient in your improvement, which I love. Could not be liking it more.
So I manually put in some data from the Masters because we don't have access to the automatic feed from that, and so I watched. So we did Scotty Scheffler, of course, because we want to see as the winner what did he perform at the Masters, and what you do at Augusta is every time they're in the pine straw, it's a disruptor. Like, what do we know about Augusta National? You cannot play from the pine straw in Augusta National, and they're always hitting low punches out or hooking it around trees. And so every shot in the pine straw is a disruptor. And if you look at Bryson's round last year, the year before, where he missed the cut, he was in the pine straw constantly playing out the pine straw. So it's not a penalty. It's a missed fairway, but it's worse than that. You cannot get access the green the way you want to access the green if you're in the pine straw.
Wow.
Disruptor. Love it.
The one thing that I really enjoy about it, like when I've been using it, is just like there's something about it that just makes playing more fun when you have that mentality of like, okay, I'm going to give myself as many offense. Like I feel like I'm on offense, or I feel like I'm on defense, and then I feel like it's more of like intention based of like, all right, you know, is this a shot where I can access P12, or am I going P6 here, or is this one where, you know, going for green to try to get a blackjack? Like it just, I feel like now the flow of a round is more intentional, and it's like, it's almost like you've got this like score going in your head. It's like you're playing football, like you're racking up sacks and you're racking up like tackles for loss, and like you're keeping track of like what you're doing throughout the round. And I don't know, it's just something about like labeling the different, I call them like score value for each shot. Like it just makes playing golf a little more intuitive and a little more fun for me personally. I don't know if you've heard that before, but I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I had a tour player, Patrick Reed was doing it, and his game was how many IPs can I make? Yeah. I need to make 8. I want to make 8 or more IPs around. That was the game. Yeah. And he did it at Torrey Pines the year he won. That was the first time he used it. And I think he won before he went to live at some point, but it must have been 3 years ago now. But the game was how many inside 20 feet can I hit?
That's awesome.
Right? Keeps you focused. Yeah. Keeps you counting. Mm-hmm. You have to get to 7. Yeah. You want to be on tour, you better get to 7.
Yeah. And
period.
It's incredible.
And it's relevant too.
Yeah, it's and for, you know, level 1 type players or level 2 type players, that might just be greens and regulation. We're like, we've got to get it on the green sooner.
Greens and 3 putts.
Yeah, that's the big one. I mean, I think when you can give them the data, and this is where strokes gains, I think, it doesn't contextualize that way. You know, like, oh, you got to get better. Well, okay. I mean, what does that mean?
and you know what? Right. And you know what players say when you say you need to get better? They can say no shit.
That's why I'm here.
Okay, now where do we go? Yeah. What does that mean? What does better mean? Does it mean I need to make 1 more putt around? Does it mean I need to make 6 more putts around? I don't know. If you're doing stroke change, you don't know what that means. How many more? Your approach to the green is you're losing. Okay.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Well, what does that mean?
Well, exactly. There is no answer to that from strokes gained.
No, as a coach, it wasn't enough information to take action on. It wasn't enough information to say, when you go to the range tomorrow, here's exactly what you need to work on.
100%.
Yeah.
And that communication between coach and player, I haven't seen it anywhere besides GameForge. And I for the coaches, and we have coaches all over the world that listen to this podcast, as they reach out to us, you should use it. We've said it time and time again, but this is the guy who created it. And again, you're talking about AimPoint and GameForge, huge influence on how we're teaching this game and how we're playing the game. Yep. And I could not be more encouraging of people to use it, coaches and players.
100%.
Cool. I know as a coach, I couldn't coach without it anymore. I couldn't. I don't know how I did it before, honestly.
No chance. No chance. It's just the game plans are there. So, Mark, we want to thank you. That was phenomenal. We're so grateful.
Thank you for having me.
So grateful to have you on. Is there anything you'd like to say? Any closing words?
I appreciate you guys having me on. I love to talk to like-minded people who are really curious about golf and really trying to dig in and understand it versus, kind of old school where it's like, just go to the range and we'll figure it out. It's that we're past that. Golf is behind the times compared to every other sport in terms of analytics. And you guys are riding the curve on that. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And tune in next time, Golf Intervention Podcast. We're so glad you're tuning in with us. And thank you again, Mark. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you soon.